Ted, you say real growth doesn't come from fixing what's broken, but from creating intentional challenges. Can you unpack what that means?
Sounds like you've done a little research on me. So thank you for that. And also thank you for inviting me. Honored to be here. I've listened to some of your other podcasts, and you have quite profound conversations. So I am looking forward to this. So um, real growth, and now and after all that, I'm going to ask you to restate your question again. So not from fixing things, I think is what you were saying. Real growth doesn't come from trying to fix things. It's creating, you said, challenges for yourself. Is that correct? What you're asking me? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, not fixing what's
Okay.
broken, but from creating intentional
So
challenges.
to start, when I work with people, just to start, uh, there is something that is important for people to understand is that you as a human being, you're not broken. I mean, you watch parents with a newborn. The child was just born an hour ago, or just born seconds ago. And something you'll hear parents say about a healthy baby: my child is perfect. 5 fingers, 10 toes, and eyes, and I have a perfect child. At what point do we stop being perfect? Is it when we're two and we're the terrible twos and we're breaking things? But it's not that we're breaking things, we're curious. We're just curious. That's the way we are exploring the world. So does that then make us imperfect? Or if we were born perfect, do we ever stop being perfect? But yet we live our lives as though there's something wrong with us, we have issues, and we build this entire identity around it, and there are all kinds of things. So if you can get that no one's broken and no one needs to be fixed, which means you also don't need to be healed. And this is challenging in a world where you're told you're broken, you have problems, we're constantly, if someone doesn't say it to us directly, we hear it in the media, the movies, and we're told that this is just normal and it is what it is and there's nothing you can do about it. That's just life, buddy. Get over it. Well, where's the proof for that?
You know, that that's something that I have come to realize in the last 6 to 8 months, well, probably a year now, especially exploring the podcast, because that thing that you said about that we feel that we're broken, it's like, when did we start feeling that we were not the real word, or the key word is like that we're not
Mm.
good enough, or that we're not worthy enough? That is, I think, that every human experience that is that internal voice that comes from a sense of inadequacy. Someone rejected you, somebody yelled at you, somebody says something to you, that your brain created a story automatically when you were a kid and said, well, apparently we're not good enough because we are rejected. And we don't challenge those stories. And as you said, we believe that we are inherently flawed. As a humans, yes, we are flawed. We make a lot of mistakes for sure. But being flawed and being broken as like something that unwanted goods is how a lot of people see themselves. And it's hard to rewire and change that. It's easier to change that thought, but the emotion is what's harder, because you can think, okay, I'm not broken, and yet you feel it. How using or creating intentional challenges can help you grow, and not focusing on quote unquote fixing my unworthiness, or me feeling like I'm not good enough.
Well, whether it's your personal life or in business. So, from a business perspective, I say if you're the CEO and you are not intentionally creating problems for your organization to solve, you should be fired or retrained immediately. And so if
Huh.
you are, just look at Apple, I would say Steve Jobs was a master at intentionally creating problems. And I didn't say challenges, I didn't say difficulties. See, we are told that the word problem is a problem. and we either want to get rid of problems, or we want to say that guy is the, and if we get rid of that guy, all the problems go away. It was him or his fault. So uh, when Steve Jobs said, "Hey, put 1,000 songs on a listening device," people are like, "Well, how do you do that? It doesn't exist. If you want a little listening device, get a Walkman." Well, we're going to make that obsolete. And out comes the iPod. You have 1,000 songs, and then mission accomplished. And he says, "Now turn that into a cell phone." How do we do that? And why are we in the cell phone business? So he's creating problems, and people are learning things that they normally would have never learned if they continued to only make computers, laptops. So now here we are in life, in your just regular life. There, you do it naturally. So as an infant, all healthy human beings have created problems for themselves. We just don't see it as that. There's really, what we see is and I'm going to say infants don't have the language to know that something's wrong with them or there's a problem. There's just this intention. And I'm saying that as an adult, the infant doesn't have that language. But do you remember when you first could not walk? You remember that?
Yeah.
Good.
Yep. Well, no, actually, I don't. I don't. I was like, I was picturing my brother. I was like, wait, there's no way I could remember. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So when you as a 6 month old, 8 month old, whatever, 12 month old, you're first you're having a problem even standing. You're like wobbling, and you have to grab
Yeah.
on or you fall. And then you say to yourself, "I'm going to get there." And you fall. You just created a problem for yourself. What you never said, "I'm a failure. I'm not good enough to walk." I mean, just imagine if infants had the mindset of many adults. They take a few steps, fall, and say, "Hey, look, walking's not for me. It doesn't resonate. It's not cut out for me. Get me one of those wheelchairs and I'll be happy. I'll live happily ever after." But children don't have that language. They don't have that mindset of looking. I'm afraid to look bad in front of everyone. So they create problems, and boom. Same with learning to eat. You see the child, they can't even get the spoon in their mouth. It's on their nose, it's here, it's somewhere else, it's everywhere except their mouth. Um, and they have to actually learn. They have to learn to walk, learn to feed themselves, learn to talk. They say words wrong, and everyone laughs, but they don't know that, oh, I look embarrassing. So here we have innately as human beings, we have this capacity to create problems for ourselves, accomplish them, and be better off than we were. So now we can walk. Now we can feed ourselves. We can actually speak and say, "I'm hungry," or "I don't like that food. I want this food. I want to go here. I want to go out and play with my," we can communicate. We can say, "I don't understand. Can you explain it to me?" And these were all problems that we created for ourselves and never thought we were broken and needed to be fixed.
Okay. Love what you said. So number one, I guess innovation doesn't always or doesn't just come from solving problems but also creating problems and solving them, like Steve Jobs said that nobody there was not a problem of somebody wanted 1,000 songs in a
Exactly.
device. Only Steve Jobs wanted that. He created a problem and created the solution, innovation. But also I love that example of us walking because I've brought it to the podcast several times, especially when it comes to how long does it take us or how long it takes us to learn something new, that we are the ones, or at least especially for me because I've experienced a couple of times in my life where I try something, for instance like meditation. I try for a week, try for a month, and I sucked in the past, and I'm like, yeah, this thing's not for me. Well, since when? Yeah, since when? I still the only thing I remember sort of when I learned how to read a little bit, but most the last thing I remember that it was so hard that I thought that I was never going to be able to do it. And probably a lot of people felt the same way. It was learning how to drive. It was
Mm.
overwhelming. You have to pay attention to the cars in
Right.
front of you, side you, on the back, check this the speed at the gas, and there's so many different things that we get overwhelmed. And I remember also I was learning a manual car. It was like there's no way I'm learning how to drive. There's no way. And then now we just drive in almost autopilot. We don't even realize we are
Yes,
driving,
exactly.
and that is a key thing because, as you said, if we had that prefrontal cortex, that self judgment, or that idea that if we try something for a few times, maybe a few days, and it didn't work, then we'll all be just crawling around because nobody would
Exactly.
walk. People would feel like, hey, this walking is not for me. But I wonder, since we're mentioning creating challenges and all of that, how can you, what would be the difference between creating intentional challenges for ourselves, let's say on a personal level or maybe in our career, from the everyday problems that people are trying to fix? Because I think that could be a very blurred distinction between one and the other. When people might say, "Well, I'm already solving problems," but you're just running your day to day without thinking, how can you improve your life by creating new problems to help you grow?
Well, you were a financial analyst, right? So if you were to go out and say, so look at the infant that says, I'm here, I can stand on my own. I have an intention to get there, the other side of the room, and they fall and they do. So if for you to create a problem that says, I'm going to learn about finance, well, maybe you go to a deeper level of finance, right? But you're a guy who already knows finance. But there's someone out there who perhaps wants to be an entrepreneur. And learning about finance is maybe they've always said, I'm bad at math. Um, I don't like math. I don't care
Hate
about numbers.
numbers.
Like all these conversations, they've built an entire identity around it. And now once they have an identity, uh, they it's almost like you have to validate the identity that you have. So I'm not good at that. I have proof. Look, I failed at math. I didn't do well in accounting, so I'm not cut out for it. That's no different than the child who fell a couple of times trying to get to the other side of the room and said, not for me. But if you create this problem for yourself, you create a structure that supports you having some real competence in finance because it's part of me wanting to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to need to know if my business is profitable. Uh, Profit is not an enemy. It's actually a responsible way to run a company because if you have zero profits, you probably won't stay around very long. So it's a very responsible way to get your business to grow from where it is to where you like it to go. And it's analogous still to the child that's on this side of the room that wants to get to the other side. And you haven't learned about finance. So there are schools you can go. You can go to a community college. You can take a course somewhere. You can hire a tutor. There are all sorts of ways you can read books. You don't have to go to Barnes and Noble. You can go to the library, and there are books on finance that you can read. And you may have to read some things a couple of times to really start to understand what you will see. And you're familiar with something called neuroplasticity, right? Okay, so
Yes.
maybe your audience does know about it, but
But for those who
right.
don't know, can you just brief
Sure.
explanation?
So
Yes.
in our brains, if you were to do an MRI, it looks like you have all these roadways. They're called neural pathways. And those neural pathways carry the information, everything you know. And it's how you're able to connect things that seem to be unrelated because all of that's already in your brain. What you've seen, what you've heard, what you've been exposed to, what you know is there. For the things that you don't know, um, what most people try to do is just pack it on top of the existing neural pathways and make sense of it based on what they already know. That can be a challenge and you can have misunderstandings. But through neuroplasticity, they found you can grow new neural pathways that will hold these new information, new knowledge, and completely new perspectives and allow you to see yourself in the world differently. So if you're going to learn finance and you've never learned it, what's going to automatically happen is your brain is going to start to grow new neural pathways. And by itself, it will start, once you grow those new neural pathways, you'll be able to connect finance to your business and make sense of it. You'll be able to fit it into the picture and why it's so important. And it won't give you the kind of headache. But initially, you'll deal with uncertainty. Your brain, it'll be like, developing a new muscle, and it may not be so comfortable in the beginning, except to answer your question, it's part of your growth and you're actually learning something new.
Yeah, there are a couple things that you said that I want to address. I'm going to put here in a box the identity part because I really am fascinated with that topic, and I've discussed it in the podcast in the past, but I want to dive deeper with you. But what I'm going to say now is about the these neural pathways. That's what I think. I'm glad that you brought it up. I'm glad that you mentioned the neuroplasticity because we sort of know, we have heard the terms, but it's understanding that those are shortcuts that the brain creates to understand. And at the beginning, it sucks because it's not there, and creating that, and that it ties up to the walking part, that we were creating new neural pathways when we're trying to walk, and
Exactly.
until the
Exactly.
brain understood, okay, now after now one thing I've told friends of mine is like, I don't know the exact science behind it, but I think that you can create new neural pathways depending of how hard the task is, or how hard the new belief in comparison to the old belief is, or how rooted the old belief has been in your brain. You can create a new neural pathway within, I don't know, like 3 months or something, that now becomes easy. I think it's called like 10,000 repetitions, just thinking about it, or just implanting a new thought. But that is what makes us being, or help us be in control of our own experience, of our own abilities, of our own reality, and understanding that the resistance that we face at the beginning is because the way that I see it is, you have, let's say, like a field with tall grass, but then you already have a path that everyone has walked through. But if you want to go across and you start stepping into the tall grass, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to suck, and you might want to go back to the easy path. But the more you walk to the path, the more you're putting all those tall grass down, and then you create a new path that now you can just
Right.
like a shortcut, or just go there. So I love that you brought that up. The other thing, bringing it back over here from the identity part, is what you said is identity to me is the people, is what people, is who people are for themselves. It's like, for instance, if somebody has anger management issues, they cannot stop being angry because that would go against who they think they should be. Because
Right.
that's what defines them. That's why for a lot of people that are depressed or highly anxious, for them it's like, no, I suffer from high levels of anxiety. I used to be one of them, and it was hard until I realized, well, that doesn't should define me. So we are performing for ourselves, because thinking that if we do something differently, we're being fake. We're doing something against who we are, without understanding that no, we are we can change who we are. We can change internally. And what you said about the identities, I wonder, how does it work when you how this disruption or these challenges help people break from these identity loops? Because I think that a lot of people, or at least for most humans, a lot of these identity loops are subconscious, and we're not aware of those.
Okay. Um, so I'm gonna do what you did. I'm gonna put identity in a box over here and hold it. So you talking about neuroplasticity is really important. And you were talking about walking. So the reason an infant can't walk is because walking is extremely complicated. and you don't have any neural pathways in your brain to inform your body what to do. I think just to stand, just stand still, just standing up on 2 feet, you use about 300 muscles.
Wow.
So to walk, you're going to use even more, and your brain needs to go back and forth and tell which muscles to do what. And because you don't have any neural pathways to inform the muscles, you fall. So you have to keep walking until your brain grows new neural pathways to say, okay, you need this muscle to stay balanced. You need to use this part of the leg, this part of the foot, your arm, until you grow it. Now, I know a guy, his daughter is 27 years old. She was very athletic in high school and went to college, did very well, just normal, healthy human being, very smart. And she got into a car accident at 27, severe head trauma, and she cannot walk. Even though intellectually she knows how to walk, what happens is the neural pathway that tells her body what to do and how to walk severed. So they're no longer connected. So her body has no way of walking. She is now no different than a 6-month-old having to learn to walk, which means she has to grow new neural pathways to connect so that her body is told what to do. That's how important your neural pathways are in your brain. Severe head trauma, um, and just kind of aside, the brain is not intelligent. So the brain is not telling you what to do. It's not telling you to have emotions. It's not telling you to have feelings. You have a conversation with yourself, and you say, that's painful. That's trauma. I don't like. This is uncomfortable. And there's only one section in the brain that registers pain. So if you hit your hand with a hammer, a section of the brain says, ouch, that's painful. I register pain. Avoid, avoid, avoid. Someone says, I don't like you. You're ugly. The same part of the brain says, ouch, uncomfortable, avoid, avoid, avoid. So the brain has no way of distinguishing between words that I don't like and are uncomfortable. It registers it as the same pain as hitting your hammer or the woman having head trauma and can't walk. So it's not in your best interest to have a lot of trauma, physical or mental pain. It can have an impact on you. So walking is complicated. This woman now has to engage in neuroplasticity to be able to walk again. Your identity creates this. Sorry, I said create. No one creates their identity.
How so?
You're given your identity. So
Hmm.
if you were born in the year 2000, they already knew what it meant to be cool, to be smart, to be funny, to be pretty. If you were born in 1990, it already existed. If you were born in 1950, all these things existed. 1900, they may have used different words, but all these things existed. So let's say you're born in the country of Suriname, which is in South America. It borders Venezuela and the two Guyanas and the Atlantic Ocean. It's not an island, just in case. So imagine you're born in Suriname and you're half Latina, you're Dominican, and half Asian. And now you build this whole identity around whatever it means to be a Dominicana. And you didn't make it up. So now you, as a part Dominicana, can say, well, I'm Dominican and this is the way Dominicans do it. That's your identity. And I'm Asian and I'm part Asian and this is the way Asians do it. And I have the right to do it because I'm Asian. And your first language is Dutch.
Go.
So,
Yeah.
so what's that identity like, right? And it was all given to you. And then you move to the United States And does that same identity work in the US, or do you now have to learn what identity works in the US and you conform to that? So whatever it, so I'll ask you, maybe you're different. Maybe you did create your identity from nothing. So let me understand. When you were born, uh, did you choose your own name the day you were born?
Nope.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. Well, that's just one. How about your religion or lack of religion? Did you choose that?
Nope.
Okay. Did you choose what it meant to be Latino or
Mm,
Venezolano with the day
nope.
you were born?
Nope.
Okay. Damn, there's got to be something in here. Did you choose what it meant to be a male?
Nope.
Okay. But you do get all those things. Those are some of the things that make up your identity. You get that. Your
Tr-
name, your religion, your country, geographic, your language. Like I should, did you choose your first language? I assume you didn't choose that
no,
either.
I did not.
Okay. So you had nothing to do with those things that are part of your identity.
No, I did not.
So you were given an identity,
True.
just like
So,
the woman born in Suriname, half Dominican, half Asian, and her first language is Dutch.
all right. I
All
follow.
given to you.
Yes.
And you're rewarded for following what was given to you.
Yes.
Men don't do that. You're told that from a boy, a little boy. Boys do this, and then you do it, and it's like, yay, you did a good job. Don't color outside the lines, basically. And if you go against it, well, we'll penalize you. But then there's another group over here who says, we created this identity called the rebel, and we'll reward you if you come over here with us. So they've already created the identity for what it means to be a rebel.
Hmm.
And you had nothing to do with that. So you hear people say, well, I'm different and I do things like this, but you'll hear millions of people say the same thing. That identity existed before you were born and you had nothing to do with it.
But let me ask you this, and just because it's the first like I can to my mind, if you decide to go with the rebels, even though what they represent was already created,
Right.
isn't that your choice to quote unquote change your identity and become one of the other groups?
Is it your choice?
I mean, you're choosing to join them instead of following the path that you were told since you were born. I don't know. It's just I wonder if that's a choice, a conscious choice, or not.
Well, is it? It existed before you were born. Why didn't you choose something that didn't exist?
Because you didn't have consciousness. I think you didn't have. Your prefrontal cortex wasn't developed until by the age of 7, I think. So you couldn't rationalize. So you couldn't create logic. I think.
Do you know what a flow state is?
Yes,
Okay. Do you know what happens when you go into a flow state?
almost like, well, to me, kind of like, well, I don't know here, but I know that for me, just time stops and it seems like everything just works.
Your prefrontal cortex shuts down. You don't need it.
Hmm.
Stephen Cotter, uh, Stealing Fire and The Rise of Superman are two books he's written, and they've done neuroimaging, and that's how they know the prefrontal frontal cortex shuts down. People used to always say it was an explanation that, oh, it's just adrenaline. And what they found is that whole logical, rational side is not needed when you want to accomplish something extraordinary, like people say outer body experience. Like you're out of your identity now.
There's no ego involved.
I don't know if there was ever an ego involved in anything on the planet. I mean, I asked brain surgeons, where's the ego? And they all said it doesn't exist. So maybe you know where it is.
Well, to me, well, I think the ego is identity is what we think about ourselves. So, but if we don't, but that would come from the prefrontal cortex, from a rational mind. That's what I say. That's what I say. Okay, I'm this. I'm a podcaster, or I'm a runner, or I'm an entrepreneur. The I would, to me, my mind, that's the ego, but that is just how we identify ourselves. Now, if the prefrontal cortex is shut down, and we are not thinking, and we have this out of body experience, that means that we cannot challenge anything, and that it's almost like the ego is nowhere to be found, because we don't have to make sense of that. But again, it's not that it lives, as you said, I don't think that lives somewhere. I think it's just part of our consciousness, perhaps.
Or it's just part of the identity that was given to you. And you had no choice except to accept it. Because if you said, I don't have an ego, they will penalize you and say, that's just your ego talking. Now,
True. Yeah.
if you tell me, if you're now telling me that there's some little man in my brain that's telling me what to say and telling me what to do you know what that makes me?
Crazy. No.
A victim.
True. Yeah.
I'm a victim of this little man, and I have nothing to do with what he just, I am automatic because the man in my brain said I can do this and I can't do that. I'm a victim. I have nothing to do with it. It's just a little brain. And I've already said the brain is not intelligent. It doesn't tell you what biochemicals to secrete. It doesn't tell you that that was painful. You say it. Just think about the stories people make up that are never true, and they create pain in their own brain. They create distress and they secrete cortisol only to find out they were worried about something that wasn't happening. It never happened and it was never going to happen in the future. Yet they forced the brain to operate as though it was stressful.
Well, question there, and this is all the questions I ask is out of curiosity, because it's like, okay, I want to explore more. What I've known, what I've learned, and that's why maybe I'm mistaken here, who knows, is that it's not that we sometimes we can purposely create a negative thought. But my understanding on the brain has been that our nervous system, or our limbic brain, its entire job is to keep us safe, to keep us in the familiar. Anything outside of that is dangerous, because it hasn't evolved to today's day and age. Having said that, your brain creates stories, in my mind, to keep us here. Imagine when I took the big when I took the big leap and launched the podcast, when I decided to go for it, even though I had no experience whatsoever. I had no experience in terms of interviewing people, video editing, nothing. Every single day, my brain saying, this is a waste of time. Don't do it. You're gonna fail. Your things, you're gonna deplete your savings. It's not gonna work out. You're gonna be doing for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then you're gonna have nothing to show for. It's not that I intentionally had those thoughts. It's not that, okay, let me think what's the worst case scenario. Those pop in my head in a way to keep me scared and afraid, and preventing me from stepping into the unknown, which the brain cannot predict. So I wonder if, yeah, some people might create their own thoughts and negative thoughts, and they can just ruminate and ruminate and ruminate. But I wonder if that rumination starts from the brain trying to keep those people in the familiar.
Well, why isn't your brain doing that now?
Doing what now? I just creating a negative thought. Well, because I've trained myself to, every now and then I get overwhelmed by these thoughts. But once I understood why those were happening, I was able to become aware and stop from affecting me. Because one thing is to have the thoughts, Another one is once the thoughts merge with the emotion. Now that's when, in my mind, that's when we believe it. Because if I think, for instance, that the sky is green, I know that the sky is not green because I don't feel it as an absolute truth. But me thinking, what if I run out of savings and this project doesn't go anywhere? Now it creates all these chemicals in my brain. Is the fear, the anxiety, the pressure in my chest. But one thing that I've learned and realized that one, we're the thinkers of the thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. And second, what most people do, and I used to do that for many, many years, is the what I call the emotional reasoning is that, well, if I feel it, then it must be true, when the feeling is just an experience we have as a humans. But the fear we have, or the anxiety, or the sadness, of the anger, doesn't have to define that moment. It's not, the emotion is real, the meaning we give to the emotion is not. But you have to control that by becoming aware.
You ever see a picture of the from the 1930s when they were building the Empire State Building, and you see those guys sitting on a beam way up in
Mhm.
the air? So why didn't their brains say this is dangerous? You're gonna fall. You're gonna die.
Because the
Because
way you,
because that's what would happen, right? If they fell from there, they would have died, right? So if the brain is doing it, it should have said that would mean no human being would ever go to heights because the brain is going to say we're going to die,
true.
and they would secrete cortisol. They would be almost paralyzed, and then they would actually fall because they can't move properly. Their brain is not speaking to their muscles to move the way it normally would. So if the brain is doing that, those guys would have never been up there, correct?
That's correct.
So one person has a conversation that if I go up there, I'm going to fall and die. And someone probably did do that, right? I mean, and then
Most likely.
there are those who just would never go up there because that's what they are saying. And their brain is feeding them the biochemicals that are correlated with that conversation of danger, death, the ultimate danger, right? Same event, walking on the beams, and there are other guys not having that conversation, and they just walk. So is it the brain or is it what you tell your brain to do?
Hmm. That's kind of the egg and the chicken kind of question to some extent, I think. Because, at least in my mind, if you might initially have the thought that your brain is alerting you, and then you can override that by saying, no, we're safe, we have done this 1,000 times, or nothing bad is going to happen. And eventually your brain quiets down because it realizes, oh, this is safe, we are used to this. So, mm, that's interesting.
There are people who are afraid of dogs, and someone else just walks up to a dog and pets it. They see a dog, they secrete cortisol, and they avoid it. They made up a story about dogs.
Not intentionally, though, I believe. Or,
It does it matter? They're having the conversation now. And now their brain is secreting all these things that put them in a state of paralysis. And then
mm,
the other person just walks up to the dog and pets it.
but
So
is it,
the brain didn't do that.
well, if the brain creates the fight or flight response from the story that we, let's say, for instance, that I love dogs, but then imagine that at the age of 5, a dog bit me. And my brain created a story without my consent that dogs mean danger, that dogs are bad. And for the rest of my life, it's not that I repeat my story, it's the moment that I see a dog, my nervous system goes off into fight or flight. I'm in survival mode because I know that that is danger. So I cannot even, my prefrontal cortex is nowhere to be found because my my body's like full adrenaline. And unless people regulate themselves, they cannot think clearly to challenge the story. Wait, are dogs really bad? Or I just had one bad experience?
But do you get that your brain cannot do that until you create a conversation for your limbic system to do that? The brain doesn't just go on automatic. So you were bitten by a dog at 5 and you see another dog and you have a conversation about dogs with yourself. And now your brain goes into action. Before that conversation, see, before you saw the dog, you didn't have that conversation. Even though the conversation is in your neural pathways, it's just sitting there in a storage bin. And then when you see a dog, the conversation escapes the storage bin and it's almost like it goes through every part of your brain.
Hmm.
So it's not a chicken and egg. It's the conversation first. If you never had the conversation, it's see, just like the child who's learning to walk, they don't have a conversation about how embarrassing and ridiculous they look when they're walking all wobbly. They don't have that conversation. If they did, they would say either crawl or get me a wheelchair. So it didn't exist.
All right. So if we go with that notion, if we go with the notion that, of course, that we have these thoughts or the stories that we're not aware of, that when they come to light in moments of stress, in moments of what our brains considers danger, we don't, since we're not aware, we cannot have the discussion, we cannot regulate ourselves, we cannot talk to our nervous system, say, hey, it is okay, it is all right. That is, I guess, somewhat easier to spot and to deal with, whether you are by yourself or with someone else, because the moment you have like a huge emotional response in your body, then you can say, okay, maybe there's a story here. But I wonder, because we're talking about identity, we're talking about neuroscience, we're talking about neuroplasticity, we're talking about stories, all of this. And one thing that has been fascinating to me, because a lot of high performers would think that they are good, that they don't have to fix much because they're always overachieve, and it's probably one of the all their story, all these stories in their brain. But I think for them specifically, it is harder to, or for people in general, to find those unconscious beliefs that keep them stuck, because you don't have a strong emotional response. You have like a, it's almost like a glass wall that you're not feeling that you're hitting that wall. You just say, hey, I cannot just go there. But you never think about challenging it because it's unconscious. In your experience, what are those identity beliefs that maybe high performers are having unconsciously that keep them stuck?
Why would, if they're high performers, why would they be stuck? I'm a little confused by that
Oh,
question.
okay, so well, because here's the thing. That's exactly my point. I can give you an example of,
Then they're not a high performer then.
well, we need to define what a high performer is. Imagine, okay, let me give you an example. For instance, I think that might be helpful. Imagine that I achieve everything, right? And yet I'm stuck, maybe not career wise, but internally. I still feel that what I'm doing is not enough. I have the house, I have the car, I have the relationship, I have the money, I have the status, and yet there's something still missing. And I keep pushing and I keep pushing, and I feel stuck internally because I don't know what else I need to do. And in my mind, that unconscious belief is, in order to feel full or in order to feel whole, I need to keep achieving. I need to keep moving forward. It's a never ending story. And it doesn't mean that I'm a high achiever, right? I'm a high performer, but I'm lacking, or I'm stuck in other areas of my life because I don't understand what is happening unconsciously in my brain.
Okay. So we've gone down a somewhat long path, and perhaps I need to take a step back. I created the Disruptive Leadership Model, and yes, it's for business. And some hell, when I created it, it was in 2007. When you Google disruptive leadership, there was nothing there. So I started writing articles. I was published in the American Management Association. So for years, you only saw Ted Santos for disruptive leadership. And now when I see it, people say, "Oh, disruptive leadership is to create solutions. It's to get rid of problems." Yeah, that's not why I created it. I created the disruptive leadership model to intentionally create breakthroughs. Most people, when they talk about breakthroughs, they say it's a matter of luck, being in the right place, right time, being persistent. There are all these explanations. But who is talking about sitting down, starting at square one, and intentionally creating a breakthrough? So we're talking about breakthroughs are often paradigm shifts. So my commitment is that I train and develop people to be able to create paradigm shifts. And paradigm shifts and breakthroughs have a world and a language of their own. So if you look at, if we go back to the year 1890, what was the main mode of transportation in 1890?
Horses.
Exactly. And that was a paradigm. And you had to feed your horse, you had to change the shoes, you had to groom it. There were, you needed a saddle. There were all these things that you needed for that. And there was a language, what kind of horse, there was a language for that. What was a faster horse? What was a horse for plowing? All that. And then you get guys like the Wright brothers who created a paradigm shift. You're not talking about hooves and horseshoes and saddles. Now you're talking about wings and laws of aerodynamics. That's a paradigm shift. And no matter how fast you get a horse to run, it's not going to fly. You also had a guy, Henry Ford, who he didn't invent cars. I think that was in what, 1877. It was a German guy. He named the car after his daughter, Mercedes. So now we have this gasoline car, but most people can't afford it. So the paradigm for cars in 1890 was cost about $1,500. 2% of the population can afford it, and everyone else rode a horse. Well, Henry Ford said, I'm going to create this paradigm where most households can afford a car. And by 1927, he accomplished that. And the car went from $1,500. He started out with $850, and then in 1927, it was $247 for an automobile. And you were not changing hooves, you were changing tires, you had an engine, you didn't feed it grass or hay or oats or anything. But these are paradigm shifts, and there's a language for the airplane, there's a language for horses, there's a language for automobiles. There's a language for intentionally creating breakthroughs that doesn't look like the language that was sort of the default, right? So in 1890, the default for transportation was a horse. In our world, we we learn to do something and then we do more of it. And if that doesn't work, we do it better. And if that doesn't work, we do it differently. So we have a more, better, different, and we can use the same language. And when we go back to neuroplasticity, we can learn new things, how to do more, better, or different, and put it on the existing neural pathways. To create a paradigm shift, to create a breakthrough, that's going to go into a domain of things you didn't know you didn't know. And there's nothing in your neural pathways to inform you, or maybe there is. Can you give me an example of
Nope.
something you don't know
No.
yet? Right. So there's
No.
nothing in your neural pathway that can give that to you. So, um, Let me give you a real world example. I had a client. Uh, oh God, I want to give you two. Let me before I get to the client. There's a woman I know, and this is very important for all human beings. So around the age of 3 years old, children start to want. They start thinking about helping around the house. If your father knows how to fix cars, maybe your 3-year-old son comes up with a screwdriver, he picks it up off the ground and he wants to help. And that father's response could define that child's life forever. If the father says, "No, son, you're too young and too small, you can't help. Sit down over there or go in the house." At 3 years old, the child has an interpretation that says something like, "I can't work. I have nothing to contribute." And I accept it. Oh, well. And then around 8 years old, you say to that child, "Now you have chores." And they're going to be in conflict. Well, wait a second. When I was 3, I thought we established that I had nothing to contribute to work. Why are you asking me to do this? So now the child is going to grow up hating work because they created this identity. And it wasn't that the identity is this hard thing. It was really just a conversation they created that says, "I can't work. I have nothing to offer, nothing to contribute." And I accept that. And now that becomes a layer in their identity. So if you could really look at what identity is, it's just a network of conversations that we inherit, that we make up in a moment. So so I know a woman, 4 years old. She was uh, adopted and brought from South America to the States. And at 4 years old, she pulled a chair up to the sink and she starts washing dishes. And her adopted mother said, "Honey, you're going to get hurt. Uh, don't do that." And so from that moment on, she didn't want to work. She's had a problem holding jobs. She hates working. But at 4, and it's not that she was right or wrong, it's just the interpretation of a 4-year old. That's the way they interpreted that conversation of, "You can't help, you're too young, you can't do that." And so that puts the person in conflict with working. And that's now their identity. So when you now ask them to work, it's like, well, now you're asking me to do something in conflict with the identity I created at 4. What she doesn't have the distinction for that conversation. She just thinks, "This is the way I am. There's something wrong with me. I don't know what's going on, but I hate work."
And how do you become aware of that and even challenge that, especially because I think that's why the majority of people feel stuck, whether you're even if you're going back to the even high performer and you have your successful business and you hit the 10 million revenue, but then you cannot even go beyond because it would go against some sort of identity or story you had in your brain. And that is on a different level. But even with the case with your friend, is how could somebody even understand that the reason why they don't like to work, or the reason why they don't like to interact with people, or the reason why they don't like to, I don't know, run or drive or whatever the case may be, is because
Right.
a story was created without their consent when they were kids?
Well, she created the story. It's not a
Not
matter of
not
she said,
consciously though.
no, no. She said, "I have nothing to offer."
Okay.
No one told her that. See, that was her interpretation of
Mm.
her adopted mother's response. The adopted mother meant well. So, what would have been better if the adopted mother said, "This is very good. I'm so glad you want to help. Let me work with you." And then she would have grown up with a very different, she would have been like, "Wow, I can work. I have something to contribute. I can't wait to contribute here and there. Can't wait to get a job. I have something really valuable to offer." And it was validated when I was 4.
Okay. But I understand, yes, that I guess she didn't, I don't know, she didn't consciously give the interpretation. I do believe, because she probably didn't have the language of, oh, I have nothing to offer. Because what I've come to realize, at least for me, is some of the stories that I can give an example. I used to stutter a lot when I was growing up, and
Right.
I used to ask a lot of questions. And I've always been very curious. I've always tried to find deeper meaning to things, and people would ignore me. And I grew up thinking I was just too much, that people didn't care what I have to say, that people didn't want to listen to me. And that story was there for probably good 20 years or 25 years, until I was like, wait a minute. Until just recently, by the way. When I'm talking about recently, I'm 34 now. 2 3 years ago, I'm talking about, wait, this doesn't serve me. But that came with a lot of me getting curious about different things and realizing that that's I'm running on an old story, and my brain, thanks to neuroscience, and if you go deeper into the reticular activating system that filters your reality, then of course my brain is showing me all the evidence that supports that initial story, that nobody cares what I have to say. So I wonder how somebody like your friend, or maybe one of your or maybe one of your clients, realizes, wait, is that an absolute truth? Do I
Well,
really have nothing to offer?
well, look, how many people know that's a normal part of human development around the age of 3? How many people know that?
Uh, to me, it sounds like not that many, to be
Right,
honest.
exactly. So how would you know where to look?
Hmm.
Curious.
By getting curious, I guess.
Yeah, but it's that would be an example of something you didn't know you didn't know.
Yes, bingo. Yes. What's up, everyone? This is the end of part one of my amazing conversation with Ted Santos. Stay tuned for next week for part two. And if part two is already out, then press here to watch it right away. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next time.